All right, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for joining me today. My name is Robert Rodriguez Jr., and I am a professional landscape photographer, printmaker, and also a teacher. And I'm really honored to be here today on behalf of Canson Infinity. I've been an ambassador since 2011, and today I'll be sharing a presentation with you, which is titled "Beyond the Image: How Paper Transforms Your Prints." Now, I'm really here for one main reason, and that's because I love printing. I love the just the physicality of a print. I love how it really does transform your images into something that is beyond what we have on our computer screens or on our iPads or what have you on our digital displays. There is really another dimension to transferring your images onto paper. And I love the way that you can choose a really beautiful paper and combine that with your image to produce something that is, again, distinct and separate from what you see on your monitor. It really takes on a life of its own. At least that's how I try to think about printing, which is why paper selection and using papers that are going to really provide you with a way to take your images to the next level is so special and so unique. And really, a company like Canson really takes a lot of pride in giving us papers that allow us to do this. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, really going deep into the various papers that Canson has, why they have different names depending on where they're made and how they're made. And then hopefully through showing you some of my prints, I can give you a sense of how you can go about using these ideas in your own work. So I'm going to share my approach to selecting papers, at least how I go about doing it. This is based on my own experience of printing and exhibiting my work for a really long time, over 15 years, and many, many different venues, as well as making prints for lots of other people. And as I said, I'll be showing you actual prints in my viewing station. I've tried to set that up as accurately as I possibly can so that you really get a feel and a sense for the prints. But of course, it's still coming over digitally, and so there's nothing like actually seeing the print in your hand. But I do recommend that when we switch over to the viewing station that you make your Zoom window full screen so that you can get the best resolution from at least what I'm sending over to you. As I always say, there are many other approaches out there to printing and selecting papers. For me, this is the one that prioritizes creativity, personal expression, and leveraging the amazing variety of excellent papers that Canson produces today. At the end of the day, for me, it's about creating meaningful images, starts there, and then transferring that into creating a meaningful print, something that I really feel expresses my idea for the image. Of course, this presupposes that you start with a good story, if you will. That is all about becoming a better photographer, composition, storytelling, etc. But along that path, creating prints is, in a sense, a way that allows you to become a better photographer. Because when you make prints, you will see things, you will appreciate things in the print that you may not experience on screen. And that has a way of sort of giving you feedback and allowing you to really see what's working, what's not. So it all really works together in a very holistic way, if you will. So for me, what's most important today is that you take the ideas and the concepts that I'm going to share and you adapt them for your own creative goals, for your own creative vision. This is not a prescription about exactly what to do. I want you to use this so that you can use the ideas in a way that makes sense to you, that works for what you're trying to do. Please share your questions in the chat. You can actually share them in the chat, or there's another Q&A section. You can share them in there. I'll see them both, but share them there. And as I go through the presentation, if I'll answer them as I go along, unless I feel that it may throw me off the whatever I'm talking about. I don't want to get sidetracked. And then there'll definitely be a Q&A section at the end of the session where you can ask questions. It looks like we have a good crowd today. I see over 75 people here, so that really is great. Many names, so I'm not going to go through all the names, but it's great to see large number of you showing up, and hopefully I can make it worth your time. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the papers, how they're made, etc., and then we'll switch over to the viewing station, and then I'll share some prints with you, my own prints, and talk you through the paper selection process and what the papers do in terms of their qualities and their personality, if you will. So let me share my approach to making papers. And the reason why I think this approach is particularly powerful is because it allows you to make printing a part of the creative process. As I mentioned before, you can really think about telling a story with your images. This is where Canson's papers, again, really shine because the wide range of textures and finishes, they all will preserve detail and color, but with a slightly different interpretation. As Ansel Adams would say, a different performance. And so, as I said, learning the personality of these papers, you don't have to know all of them. Hopefully, I can share a structure, if you will, for how you might go about picking from the different categories. But learning what they do, and particularly how the paper complements your image, is going to give you a real sense of being more confident about selecting papers and experimenting, of course. Now, I call this approach the image-centric approach, and that means that I start with the image and the story that I want to share with the image, and then I try to pick from a category of papers that I think will best complement what I'm trying to bring across in the image. Now, this is not the only approach, right? The approach that I actually started with when I began my photographic journey was the paper-centric approach. It seemed more straightforward, right? You pick a paper or you look at a couple of different papers. Gee, I want to make prints. Here are a few papers that I can choose from. Which one do I like best? Which one do I think will give me the best quality? Whatever that means, but that's how we start. And then you essentially print all of your images on that same paper. And that's where I started. There's nothing wrong with that. I learned about printing. I learned about all the technical aspects of printing. And I started to really appreciate the power of a print, particularly if you show it to someone else or you say to someone else, hey, check out this print, right? There's just something about them holding the print in their hands that just demands a lot more attention. That's how I started out. But then I started to become curious about other papers. Well, gee, there's some other papers that I just sort of left out because I just thought, let me start with this one. And I got curious about what the other papers would do and how they would change the way the image looked and felt. And slowly, I started to realize that maybe I can think about the paper, I can think about the image and select the best paper. And that became what I call the image-centric approach. So again, I think about the image, I think about the story I'm trying to tell, and sometimes that story is not so clear. That's okay. That's a part of the photographic process, becoming better with our photography, improving our composition, all those things. But slowly you get a sense, or you should have a sense, I want something that's dramatic, I want something that's soft, I want something that has a certain feel, I want something that looks more realistic or in your face. I want something that's a little more relaxed, more subdued, more subtle. All of these words you can use because the papers will actually imbue your images with these characteristics, if you will. So when someone asks me what's the best paper for black and white, you can see that that's not a question that I consider. Of course, I understand where they're coming from, but I would ask them, well, what is it that you want to convey with this image? What is the image about? What's the story behind the image? And I think that, if you think about it, that really strengthens your vision as a photographer because you have to consider these questions beforehand. It makes your selection process more intentional. You're just not guessing at which paper to use or perhaps not taking advantage of all of the papers that are available. And they're not all just available because it's just more ways to sell paper. They really do have different characteristics. So let me start with the main characteristic here. I'm going to turn my camera off. And you can divide all papers into two broad categories. And that has to do with how much black a paper will hold, otherwise known as Dmax. And Dmax is important because it defines the total contrast that a paper can reproduce. So for me, this is the very first decision that I make. If there's kind of like if you think of like a decision tree, this is the first kind of thing that I think about, which is how much contrast or black do I think I want for my image? Because the Dmax of a paper will actually create some aesthetic characteristics in the image. So for example, more black density, uh, more contrast, right, is going to look more in your face, more aggressive, louder, if you will. Less density is going to produce a different quality to the image because it's softer, it's more subdued, more subtle, quieter, painterly, etc. And you'll see here that all of matte papers in general have less Dmax. Non-matte papers have more Dmax. That really is pretty much true. Anything like Platine, Baryta Prestige, the RC papers like Photo Satin and Premium Gloss, they are all going to have the capability to produce more black. Matte papers, by definition, are not going to hold as much black. So you can really divide all the papers right there. All matte papers on one side, which is less Dmax, all non-matte papers on the other side, which is more Dmax. Now, within the matte paper range, there are differences. And as I mentioned before, less Dmax, they will have a softer, more expressive feel, if you will. You can use different words for this: painterly, less photographic, more fine art, kind of a fine art feel to them. They also will give you much more variety in terms of the textures that the paper can hold. So a non-matte paper like Baryta or Platine, you're not going to get different textures with those kinds of papers. It's just really, pretty much smooth. Whereas matte papers, you can go from very smooth all the way to very textured, what you might think of as a watercolor type paper. So paper like Arches Aquarelle on the left is probably Canson's most textured paper, and something like Arches 88 on the right, or even Rag Photographique, is going to be the smoothest paper. And matte papers, just in general, can add this wonderful dimension to a print. The texture in and of itself can also add to the content of your image, because the texture can combine with the texture that you have in an image, if you have texture, and that can blend together to create and produce added depth in your image. All right, so that is really something that you can think about. If you have an image that has lots of texture and you don't think that you want a lot of contrast or a lot of density, then you might think about using a textured paper to really produce something that's more dimensional. Again, I will show you examples of that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about paper making, because this allows me to discuss the differences in the papers. And I won't get too technical here, but I think it's worth knowing. Every paper that's made starts with a blend of cotton fibers, or at least Canson's fine art papers are 100% cotton made. The matte papers, they start with a blend of cotton fibers and water and some chemicals and so forth, this soup that eventually will become paper. And this paper is fed into different types of machines in order so that we can produce sheets of the paper. Now, there are two primary types of machines. One is a more modern machine, otherwise known as a Ford Rinier machine. And this machine, which is the one that Canson has at their headquarters in Annonay, France, gives you a more consistent surface. It looks more modern, meaning that it looks more like a photographic paper, very smooth, consistent, structured surface. And that is appealing to those who want a paper that, again, has a very consistent surface. Now, the other type of machine that you can make a paper on is what's called as a cylinder mold machine. And this is another kind of mill that has these kinds of machines. The Arches mill in France is one mill that has a cylinder mold machine, the other one being St. Cuthbert's in England. These machines will make a paper that has a much more handmade feel. The textures are not as structured and regular as the modern machine. They're more random. So the way the fibers are put together in these machines is random, which means that you get a more distinct and a more handmade kind of look to them. Definitely going to appeal to those who want the greatest fine art appeal. And as I said, they have sort of random textures to them. So why is this important? Well, these are two types of matte papers. And when you look at Canson's line of papers, you'll notice that some of the papers have the name Arch in front of them. So for example, Arch 88, Arch BFK Reeves, Arch Aquarelle, and then some have the Somerset name. This has to do with where the papers are made, the mill. So the Arch papers are made at the Arch mill, as I mentioned. The Somerset papers, which are made at the St. Cuthbert's mill in England, these are very recent papers that Canson has come out with. These are also cylinder mold made papers. They're going, again, to give you this very beautiful, random, handmade look and feel. So papers like enhanced velvet, enhanced satin, and watercolor rag. The remainder of Canson's papers, the ones that have been around for the longest since Canson started, Canson Infinity started, those are going to be rag photographique, edition etching rag, and now rag 2, vellum museum rag, printmaking rag. These papers are made on a more modern Ford Rainier machine. So I'm not telling you which ones are better or worse. I'm giving you the things to think about in terms of the quality and the characteristics of the papers. The modern made papers, again, rag photographique, are going to be more structured, more consistent, if you will. The cylinder mold papers are when you're looking for something that really has a handmade feel to them. Again, these are all matte papers, so they're still going to have less density or less Dmax than a non-matte paper. So let's talk about non-matte papers now. And these are the papers that we're familiar with because they really have that maximum impact in terms of the colors and the textures. Platine is in the non-matte finish. Someone just asked a question about platine. So platine fiber rag is a non-matte paper, same as Baryta, Baryta Photographique, Baryta Prestige, as well as the RC papers like Photo Satin and Premium Gloss. So this is the, if the matte papers are on one side of the category, these are on the other side. These are going to give you the greatest amount of black, greatest amount of density, Dmax. They're generally going to give you a much smoother surface. They're also going to be more reflective, right? Because they are shinier, if you will, so that you're going to get, I wouldn't call it glare, but you're going to get some reflection that you don't get on the matte papers. But the, what you get for that is that they will be louder, more aggressive, very high impact. And there's a place for that. There's a place for that artistically and aesthetically. And so if you're looking for something that is much more aggressive, another key distinction about the high Dmax papers is that if you need more shadow separation, okay, if you need to separate your tones in the shadows and you want to get more detail in your shadows, then a non-matte paper will generally be better because you have more black, and since you have more black, you have more tones that the paper can produce. And so if I'm looking for something like that, Platine or Baryta, that's usually one of the papers that I select when the shadows are what I would call a major compositional component of an image. And again, I will show you examples of that. The rag photographique is part of the matte papers. So I'm going to go back one. Rag photographique is in the modern papers made on the modern Ford Rainier machine, but still a matte paper, right? And rag photographique has been around forever. It's one of my favorite papers, but I have been experimenting and using more of the cylinder mold papers, and I really love those. Again, I'll show you examples when we get over to looking at prints. Now, another question you might be thinking is, well, gee, that's a lot of papers, 4 or 5, 5 in terms of the modern papers and the mold-made papers. That's 11 or 12 in the matte side, plus then another 4 or 5 in the non-matte paper. That's a lot. How, it can get expensive, etc. And this is where, number one, knowing what the papers are capable of, and number two, having a sense of what you want to say with your image. There's always going to be a little bit of experimentation, of course, but if you have a sense of what you want to convey with your image, what you're going for, what your images are about, and you know what the papers are going to do to the image, you don't really have to try them all. You can sort of zero in, if you will, on the types of papers that are going to work best for your images. And this is what I do. So for me and the work that I do, the kinds of images that I make, generally speaking, okay, this is not an absolute, but 80 or 90% of the time, I'm making nature, landscapes, and I'm looking for a particular feel and look from the images because that's what I'm trying to convey as an artist. Okay. I generally tend to go for matte papers. I use matte papers more often than non-matte papers. And when it comes to matte papers, I tend to go for either smooth or a little bit of texture to complement some texture in the image. Very rarely do I have an image where I want to incorporate a lot of texture for that image. And that just has to do with the kinds of photographs that I'm making now. Perhaps in the future that'll change and I'll find more appeal with using a paper that has more texture. So for me, I pretty much will I'm very happy with using Arch 88 and BFK Reeves for most of my images. I mentioned before that I have used the Rag Photographique a lot. Arch 88 is very similar to Rag Photographique, but it's cylinder mold made, and so it's got a little more of a random texture to it, which I really love, but it's still very smooth. I just find that any print that I would make on Rag, on Photographique, on Rag Photographique, I like it as much, if not better, on the Arch 88. So that's what I've been using now primarily when I want no texture. When I want some texture, I use the BFK Reeves, which is just a wonderful textured paper that is subtle but still adds depth and dimension to an image. When I need more shadows, when I need more blacks, when I need more shadow separation, when I need more drama, when I need more oomph in an image because it's more aggressive, then I will typically use something like Platine Fiber Rag, which, even though it's a cotton backed paper, it has this beautiful surface that is like a satin finish, holds beautiful blacks, has a very subtle grain to the text. It's not really grain, but it has a little bit of a surface. I call it grain. It's just not as perfectly smooth as the Baryta is. And sometimes I want the Baryta. Baryta is going to be the paper that is most like a traditional photograph from the darkroom. Really smooth, really flat, and very punchy. And that's great. Knowing what the papers can do is great because now you can use those as tools in your process. So, having talked about the a little bit about the papers and what they do, let's go over. Let me take you over to my viewing station, and I'll actually walk you through some prints and show you how I went about thinking about them. Okay, so this first print here is on Rag Photographique. Most of these prints that I'm going to show you, if not all of them, I'm not 100% sure of all of them, but most of them are printed on a Canon Pro 1000. This is on Rag Photographique. As I mentioned, this is the first paper that I really fell in love with from Canson. It's really super smooth, no surface texture at all, but it's still a matte paper. And I love this paper for this image because you have lots of rich blacks. You notice that it's a black and white image, but that's okay. Not every black and white image has to be in your face, loud, aggressive. I wanted for this image something that was a bit softer, a bit more subdued, but still holds nice detail in the shadows, nice blacks in the shadows, nice and rich. You don't get a lot of shadow separation in there, but that's okay. I don't care. That's not really what the focus of the image is about. The image is about leading the eye up through to the light. That brings me to the second point about matte papers is that if I printed this on a non-matte paper, something like Baryta or Platine, this would become very bright, very strong. It would come forward. And I want to soften the highlights. I want to soften this light because I'm actually clipping the highlights there on purpose to create kind of a ambiance to the image. Matte paper allows me to really soften that back and produce an image that just feels very serene and very quiet. And that's what I was looking for. I have plenty of information here with the rocks, plenty of detail, plenty of blacks that hold, that create a base for the image, but yet the highlights don't really, and the blacks don't really call attention to themselves. You can move through the image. And so that's what I love about matte papers. But you can see that I still maintain lots of detail. I don't lose any detail in the image. And of course, these highlights nice. Next image is printed on Arch 88. And you're saying you can barely hear me, so let me check my microphone here. It should be coming through. So everybody hear? Can everybody hear me okay? Please let me know. Should be able to hear me. All right, so this image is printed on Arch 88. And this is a similar paper to rag photographique. However, this is the cylinder mold made paper, and you can see, kind of hard to see, but it's still very, very, very smooth, but it does have more of a subtle texture on the surface. It just doesn't feel as smooth as a rag photographique does. And even so, even with a matte paper, still printed a black and white image here, because as you can see, I'm not interested in the details in the shadows. I'm interested in just creating, again, a very feel for the image, a feel that just creates a sort of quiet subtleness to the image, but at the same time still allows me to produce this sense of darks and then lights, darks, lights, and also using a long exposure, create a lot of movement in the sky. And the matte paper for me just maintains that sort of very dreamy feel to the image, particularly because I use the long exposure to blur the water. Again, if I printed this on a non-matte paper, it would, I think, gain too much contrast. It would become a little bit too loud, and that would, I think, not be the kind of story that I'm trying to tell with this. So again, Arch 88, very smooth and very little texture, which complements these really soft areas here. I don't want any texture in the sky or texture in the water to interfere with the image itself. This next image here is this next print. This is also printed on Arch 88, and same thing as before. Okay, Arch 88, very little texture, if any at all, but again, still holds beautiful darks, but not super detailed. So I'm able to create, again, a feel for the image. What I'm trying to highlight in this picture, in this print, is not the shadows here, but really the sense of movement through the image to the light. And once again, because this light is sort of has a certain dramatic feel to it, it feels very airy and moody and has a certain ambiance to it. The matte paper just allows this to really become a little softer. Colors come through in a more painterly way, if you will. That's a good word I guess I could use for this image. It's to be more painterly, more nuanced. And yet you can see here that we still have a lot of detail in the foreground. See all these little grasses here, these little blades of grass poking through the water. So I don't lose any detail there, but it just, again, has a very softish feel to the image that is what, again, I'm trying to convey with the image. I've got my main darks here, so I don't need rich darks. I would make the trees come forward. I want everything to kind of blend together. Softness, or the less density of the paper, allows those things to combine. Let me just raise my mic because some of you are saying that you can't hear it too well. So I'll raise it up a little higher. All right. Okay, so this next image is printed on Arch BFK. Now, BFK is similar to Arch 88, but this has a texture to it. You can see the texture right here. I hope you can see that texture there. And that texture, you can see, complements this image really, really well because I've got a lot of texture throughout the entire image. Even the sky has texture in it. It's not like it's a plain blue sky. There's a lot of textures going on throughout the image. So texture in the paper complements the image really well, and that allows the image to become more dimensional. See how I've focused the composition is focused on the foreground with these beautiful shapes here. I like that texture to really make that more dimensional. And again, I went with a matte paper because I just wanted to produce a softer feel to the image. The light is kind of soft. The light is not strong or dramatic. I got very soft shadows, sort of overcast light with these beautiful blue colors in the background. Again, the matte paper just allows those things to blend, those elements of the picture, the composition to blend together a little more easily versus a non-matte paper, which would have, again, made it very loud and aggressive and perhaps made the foreground more important than the background, which is not what I wanted. Now, there's a question here. Yes, I am using a Pro 1000, and I use the same printer for everything. So it doesn't matter whether it's black and white or color, and the same inks, Canon inks. Okay. So another image here. This is another image that is printed on BFK Reeve, same as before, and same idea in terms of why I chose this paper. I love BFK. You can see the texture here, very subtle texture, and because it's cylinder, made on a cylinder mold, texture is very random, right? So it's not like the same uniform pattern. It just changes throughout. That just gives the paper more of a fine art appeal. And again, for this image, it's not about the blacks. It's really about the shapes and moving your eye through the image. Light area up here, these major shapes. I want it to be as graphic and even perhaps a little bit abstract. Using a non-matte paper, something like Platine, would definitely make these black areas stand out more. And so that would not be what I'm looking for. Now, there's a question about BFK pure white versus natural white. This paper comes in two different variations. This is the pure white, and then there's a natural white. As far as I know, the textures are the same in both. So I haven't noticed that the texture is greater in one or the other, just the how bright the surface is. Some folks like the pure white, some like the more natural white. But notice the effect that I'm able to generate here. It just makes the image more abstract, if you will, less aggressive. And again, the nature of the image is a very quiet scene with just fog moving out and allowing this light to come down and highlight a bit of this here in the back. All right, now this, I'm going to show you a different paper now. This is the new line that Canson released from papers that are made at the St. Cuthbert's Mill, and this is Somerset Enhanced Velvet. And this paper is similar to BFK, but the texture is even a little more obvious, right? You can see a little more texture here than the BFK, so it's got slightly more texture, but notice that even with that texture, you can see the grasses here really beautifully. These grasses that are poking in through the water. They look really great. I don't lose any of the details there. You can see the rock here maintains all its detail. And what I love about this image, that looks like a little dot that landed on the print afterwards. So that's not part of the image. I have to make another print of this. But what I love about this paper is, again, it just gives you a very subtle texture to the surface of the image. You can see it even up here in the sky. There's a little texture to it, but it doesn't interfere with the image. You can still separate the water from the rock, from the land very easily, and the colors come through really beautifully. So the colors are allowed to be a little more expressive without the super rich darks getting in the way, which is what would happen if I printed this on a non-matte paper. Again, this is how I choose to express these images. The point is that you You can choose these characteristics for yourself in terms of what you're trying to achieve. Okay, a few more on the matte side, and then we'll switch over. This is another Somerset paper, Somerset Enhanced Watercolor. Now, I mentioned to you guys before that I very rarely use watercolor paper or the papers like aquarelle. This is called watercolor because the texture tends to be too strong. If you look at the images that I've shown you so far, the texture would be too strong. It would get in the way of the image, I think. But in this type of image, where there's pretty much texture throughout, got a lot of texture in these fern leaves in the background, then the aquarelle does a beautiful job. See, hopefully you can see some of that texture. Most textured paper, and that really works beautifully with this kind of image. It just gives it more depth and dimension. It makes it almost three-dimensional. And also the colors, I think, come through really beautifully. So this new Somerset paper, all three of them, whether it's the enhanced velvet, the watercolor, or the satin, they do a great job with colors, nice and rich and vibrant, but yet they maintain the softness of the subject matter, at least for me in this image. Show you one more. This is harsh aquarelle. And once again, a very strong texture. And you can see why I chose it for this image. I hope you can start to see kind of a pattern of why I'm choosing these papers. This is really a small kind of abstract scene, this canyon with these beautiful formations, textures in the image, and that to me just kind of calls out for a paper that can complement those textures throughout. That really gives the print a wonderfully dimensional feel to it. You can almost imagine touching those textures just by looking at the print. So for this, one of those rare occasions when I decided to use a heavily textured paper, again, this is Arch Aquarelle, printed on my Pro 1000 again. As I mentioned, I'm using Canon for all these prints. Colors come through beautifully. I get nice shadow areas, but the color and the texture is really beautiful. And for me, this is the best choice right now for the paper that I would use for this image. Okay, so that's kind of a rundown of matte papers. Now let me show you some images that I printed on non-matte papers to give you a sense of why I chose a non-matte paper. So clear. All right, so even though this is a black and white image, but that's not the reason why I chose a non-matte paper. I decided to print this on a non-matte paper. This is Baryta Photographique because the nature of the image demanded that I think that I use paper that gives me as much black as possible. I really wanted a more aggressive look to the image. The image is has more shadow details. I wanted to really separate the tones here in the foreground. I got very subtle differences in the tones between these rocks and also the sand here, the wetness of the water here. I wanted to really project that, and that is best done with a non-matte paper, a satin or gloss paper like this. So you notice that I get a lot more definition here with the water that really separates it, and I get this beautiful separation between the sky and the clouds. And Baryta is the smoothest non-matte paper that Canson has, so I'm able to maintain all of the various textures here. Really, really smooth where I don't want any texture, to down here where there's some texture in the image, but I don't want to minimize that texture by using texture on the paper. So a smooth paper allows the differences in the texture of the image to come through as much as possible. Once you add texture to an image with paper that you choose, you're sort of minimizing the differences in texture in the image. And I wanted to maintain this separation of textures very smooth here, and then the textures in the image come through here. Therefore, really smooth paper like this is going to be ideal. And again, the blacks give me that punchiness that I was looking for. Here's a portrait. And again, I wanted something that was very photographic, very sort of in your face, right? This is my son wearing a Halloween costume many years ago. And it just gives you a more richer feel to the image because the blacks come through. It looks more photographic. And I wasn't looking for something that was paint or anything like that. I wanted something that was just very in your face because that's how the image felt. That's how he was acting when I made this image. And so once again, Barita here does a beautiful job. You can see how smooth it is, and it gives me beautiful blacks, high Dmax. Just it makes the image pop. For this image, that's what I wanted. Okay, I mean, in general, I want all my images to pop. I like them to pop in different ways to resonate with the viewer in different ways. In this one, I wanted really something that was very photographic and very loud, if you will. This is also printed on Barita. And again, Barita is one of Canson's really beautiful papers. It's an alpha cellulose backing, but it has this beautiful Barita finish that gives you just wonderful richness in the darks. And this image, which is a reflection in water, you can see how it really lets the water shine, if you will. Right? It has a certain quality to it that really comes through. And that's what I was looking for in this picture. I wanted the reflection to really to really preserve that sense of the shininess of the water and the reflection. And so Barita for me was an easy choice. I may have printed this on a matte paper, and while it took on a different quality, it wasn't the quality that I was looking for. So I wanted something that was much more aggressive. Colors, shapes, and also again this effect of the water. If you've got water that you really want to project, for example, something that's shiny, well, the paper is shiny. The paper has a shine to it. It's going to be more reflective, and that's going to give you that effect of producing that in your. This is also printed on Barita Photographique. Again, one of my two favorite papers, this and the Platine, which is coming up soon. Don't worry, I have Platine, but again, Barita for this. Notice how smooth this is here. All right, similar to another black and white image that I showed you where I used the long exposure. Difference is that here, I wanted this to be very more aggressive and more in your faces, louder. I wanted to really project these shadows and these black areas in the foreground, these shapes, to provide a nice grounding so that your eye can kind of move through. And I also wanted to really gain as much depth and presence from the clouds here. So using a high Dmax paper will give me darkness here in the clouds. Yes, you can argue or imagine that I can add more black and print it on a matte paper, but the difference is that the matte paper has just a lower dynamic range. A paper like Barita has a higher dynamic range. So the difference between the lights and the darks is going to be greater, giving me in this case more of the feel that I'm looking for. Just a more contrasty image that translates into particular energy to the image. That's a good word to use, I suppose. An energy to the image that I would not have if I printed on a plain matte paper. Barita, all of Canson's papers, all of the fine art papers do not have any OBAs. Barita Photographique has a barium sulfate, and so the barium sulfate has an OBA in it, barium as part of the coating. So take that coating away, then you don't have Barita anymore. But even so, the longevity of Barita is still almost as close to the other papers. So you don't have to really worry about the longevity with Barita. If Platine is 175 years in storage in a box, then maybe Baryta is 125 or 100. So they're still all in the same general range of being archival museum grade papers. Okay, now we come to Platine. And I like Platine because it does two things. Number one, it does give you that higher Dmax, that higher contrast, really preserve all of the shadow detail in here. If I printed this on a matte paper, I would lose all of the separation in here. I would just have kind of a big black dark shape, which would sort of be a distraction in the image. But because I'm using Platine, it preserves more of those darks. I get more black, and then I get more separation, making this much more subtle and much more interesting. And then the other thing I love about Platine is that it does have very subtle, I don't want to call it texture because that would probably be not accurate, but it definitely has some surface detail. Call it like a little tiny bit of grain or just a little of an irregularity. And again, that just adds the slightest amount of dimension to the print, but you look at the sky, nothing that gets in the way that sort of becomes a distraction, still incredibly smooth. Platine also has a cotton backing. So that also adds to its feel because it's a 100% cotton back paper, so it feels different in your hands versus Baryta. Here's another Platine, and same idea. You notice that I have other images that are similar to this one, but this has a different feel to it. Number one, I wanted to really project the feel of the rocks all being wet. I'm not leading the eye up to the sky like I was before. Just have some clouds here that are kind of mimicking or repeating the pattern of rocks in the foreground, but really I want to keep the eye down here. And so down here, I've got lots of textured rocks, I want the rocks to feel dimensional, to feel heavy. I want the water that is kind of going inside of here through a long exposure to feel like it's splashing around. And of course, to feel like it's wet. In order to do that, you need more Dmax because the Dmax gives you richer darks and you get this shinier surface that allows that sort of illusion of the paper being wet, if you will. And so for this image, that's why I chose Platine, because I think it comes closer to my vision for the image. I want it to be very sort of, very visceral, if you know, being on the ocean, waves splashing in and making you wet. That's kind of what I wanted to really project instead of something that was more painterly or here's another image of the print. This is also printed on Platine. I could have printed this on Baryta, of course, but I printed this on Platine because you notice that the surface of the ice here has lots of texture and just lots of little details. And so why not take advantage of Platine, which will give me a little bit of that surface interest that I mentioned before. But more importantly than that, I use Platine because as a paper that has more Dmax, more contrast, more black, it really makes the ice much more, not sure what word to use, it makes it more dimensional, more textured, more real, more concrete, if you will, right? It just projects the ice more in a way where a matte paper would soften it. And ice isn't really soft. It's not, feel that I'm looking for here is not something that's soft or subdued or quiet. And I'm looking for something that's more aggressive. That's why I used or chose Platine because of that higher contrast level, higher Dmax. Right? So we can talk about textures and everything, but as I said before, the very first decision that I think about is, do I think I want more black or less black? And for this, I'm pretty confident that I wanted more. And one last image. This is printed on, also printed on platine, and I probably could have printed this on Baryta as well and gotten a similar look and feel. Baryta or platine are going to give me the greater contrast, more separation in the shadows. Okay, here I've got lots of detail here that I wanted to preserve in the shadows here, these little bushes that are just catching the first moments of light. And higher Dmax paper, more contrast, allows me to preserve those little subtleties there. On matte paper, it probably would have softened that a bit in a way that I didn't want. I really wanted to maintain this here because that's a major portion of the image. So I didn't want the eye just to immediately go here right away. I also wanted to maintain some interest here. But of course, my main shapes here, which are just these repeating patterns, with the platine, that really makes them very dramatic, very striking, and it, in a sense, preserves the feel that I had, which is this dramatic moment with the sun coming up and backlighting these amazing Joshua trees. And so platine for me, I think here works better. It was a very dramatic sort of eye-opening experience, and that's what I wanted to preserve. That's different with the matte paper. Matte paper would project other types of feelings or other types of ideas about the image. And so again, this is how you can start to think about selecting a paper, knowing what the paper will do to your image, and learning. I mean, all of this is a process of learning about your images and learning about what the papers will do to the image. Okay, so I'm going to come back. All right, so I'm back to my main setup here. I hope everyone could hear me fine. I don't think that I changed anything with the microphone, so I apologize if some of you couldn't hear me that well. Some said you could hear me okay, so all right. So I hope that was I hope that gave you some insights into selecting papers and also gave you some information about the papers, how they're made, really the process that Canson goes through to produce these papers and why they have the names that they do, because it really is about using these very traditional paper making processes that produce this beautiful paper. And you know, as far as I know, Canson is probably one of the very few companies that is producing their papers at 3 different mills that are under the umbrella of Canson. Most other paper manufacturers are outsourcing. This gives Canson a lot of control over quality, a lot of control over consistency over time. And of course, everything is tested. I've been to the mill in France, and it's unbelievable the amount of attention and detail that goes into making sure that every paper that comes off the mill is up to their spec and their standards. And that little bit of improvement every time means that your prints will will benefit from those from that excellence that Canson is putting into the papers. You know, when I do an exhibition or show my work in a gallery, what have you, you know, Canson is not there. I'm there on my own as an independent artist, and I certainly want the best possible paper on the wall, sharing my print with others. And so for me right now, this is, and has been since I became an ambassador, it really has been the best papers that I've been able to find. But of course, don't take my word for it. You can certainly try these papers. Canson sells and provides discovery packs. So you can get a discovery pack for the Arch papers. You can get a discovery pack for the Somerset papers, and also you can get one that combines a bunch of the different papers like platine or Baryta or addition etching, etc. That's the best way to learn. Pick up a discovery pack, try these papers. It's probably ideal not to use too many images. Keep it to just a couple of images. Maybe select 2 or 3 images that have different qualities to them, where you might imagine one image being very photographic, very loud, very aggressive, needs a lot of black. pick another image that maybe you want something that's a bit softer, more expressive, and then experiment and try on the different papers. The fewer options you use when you're learning, the more you'll be able to see what the papers do. Because if you use different images for different papers, you won't know exactly what's changing. I've gone through stages where of course, I printed the same image on 4 or 5 different papers and compared, and that's how I started to refine these ideas so that I could select the best paper. And it's not science, and it certainly isn't an exact process. So there are a few prints that I showed you that I could have probably used 1 or 2 other papers. As long as I'm getting the overall feel right, then a little bit of texture or less texture isn't going to make a tremendous difference in terms of my satisfaction with the print. But certainly, I almost always, when I make a print and it's on a matte paper, I can tell right away, no, I think it needs more contrast, or vice versa. If I try on a non-matte paper, I can almost instantly tell it just doesn't feel right. I should have gone with a matte paper, or I need to use a matte paper. Does anyone have any other questions? Yes, it's definitely being recorded. So a question by Robert Atkins, how should one think about the change created by framing under glass? Yeah, so when you put glass over your print, it's definitely going to cut down on the perception that the viewer has of your image. But nonetheless, it just minimizes or cuts down the qualities of the paper. It doesn't eliminate them completely. So by that I mean that if you have a print on Baryta and you have a print on BFK Reeves, and you put glass over both of them are going to lose a little bit of what makes them special because of the glass, but you're still going to be able to see the difference between one being high Dmax and one being low Dmax. So I would say that the glass is just another barrier, but whatever the quality the print has is still going to come through. If you use a heavily textured paper, you're still going to be able to see the texture through the glass. Maybe not as, viscerally as you would if you held it in your hand, but it's still going to be there. So I think of the glass as just an unfortunate side effect of having to protect our prints from either dust or UV rays or what have you. Great question. I live in France. Is it possible to visit the plant? I do not know, but I'm sure if you email them, they would let you know. I think they give tours, if I'm not mistaken, so you might be able to get a tour. Is there any specific reason why you didn't show, this is from Stefano, why you didn't show any print on Baryta Prestige 2? I think it has a beautiful texture and a very broad color gamut, in addition to the nicer feel than the regular Baryta since it is cotton alpha cellulose mix. I totally agree, Stefano, on that. The simple reason is because I didn't want to stay here too long. I had many prints to choose from. I've got a few that I printed on that, and I really wanted to give you concepts. But yes, you're absolutely right that the Baryta Prestige is a really nice paper with a wider gamut. One thing about the Prestige is that it is the shiniest of the papers, and so that may be something that some folks don't want if they want to keep their images or their prints more away from gaining a lot of that glare that Baryta provides an image, will produce. But yes, the Prestige is a really nice, a great paper. Perhaps on the next webinar, I'll show you some prints of that, and we'll keep mixing it up. But thank you for that. Are rolls of paper available to print with a P900 roll feeder? I believe the smallest roll paper that Canson sells is 17-inch. And so as long as your printer is 17-inch, I think the P900 is, then yes, you should be okay. Superb presentation, Joachim. Thank you. Appreciate that. Kate, thanks this was very helpful for someone just starting out. Great. Appreciate that. Lawrence, what is the difference between edition etching rag, and edition etching rag 2? Is rag 2 identifiable from the packaging? Yes, it's definitely identifiable from the packaging. And the edition etching rag 2, you could just think of it as another evolution of rag. I believe it's a tiny bit brighter than the original rag, but otherwise they're very similar. Again, it's just another step in making the papers better than they were before. Edition Rag is one of Canson Infinity's original papers. And so they're constantly trying to just improve them every little bit that they can. So if you like Edition Rag, then you certainly will like Edition Rag 2. And yes, they are clearly labeled, of course. JC, nice presentation. Thank you. Lou, what is your recommended viewing light for your prints? Yes, I saw that question come up before. I apologize, I didn't answer that. I have a viewing station by a company called GTI, and it is about 26 inches square, so I can get a print that's 13 by 19. Most of the prints that I showed you today were 13 by 19 size, so it fit in there pretty nicely. That's one option, or you can just get a light for your desk, not as expensive as a viewing station. The most important thing is that you get a light that is what's called full spectrum, which means that the light source puts out all of the wavelengths of light equally so that you see the true colors in your print. If it's warm or cool, or it's not perfectly full spectrum, then it's going to shift the colors in your image. So make sure that the light is full spectrum. I can't give you an exact model or brand, but I'm sure you can find it online. Any comments on protecting with finishing spray like Premier Art? Yes, I've done that in the past. You can protect your prints with a spray. That's good if you want to show them or share them without putting glass on them. I love doing that. The problem with spraying your prints is, number one, it's messy. You need a dedicated space for that. Otherwise, it's going to go everywhere. It's messy. It's not good for your lungs. And it does change the quality of the print ever so slightly. So unless somebody really demands that I spray the print, I would just leave it without that. And depending on what you're doing with it, make sure it's not in sunlight. Make sure it's not exposed to ozone, like close to your refrigerator. And then accept the fact that it's not going to last as long as a print that is protected, but you may be willing to make that compromise to have this beautiful print on the wall without anything on it coming between you and the viewer and the print itself, like glass. Claude, thanks for informative. Thank you. Rob Cruto, thank you. Mario, thank you very much. Stefano, thank you. Russell, thank you. Chris, thanks. Andrew, does it matter what spray brand? Premier Art, the one that I believe, if you asked that before, Premier Art is usually the best one. Or if you can't find Premier Art, well, there's another company, paper company, that also makes a spray. That paper company starts with the letter H. You can go and check them out. They also make a spray. Gutierrez, thank you. Jane, thanks. John, I use the Pro 1000. Yes, I love my Pro 1000. Love Canon printers in general. Epson are great as well. I have an Epson P800, but if I was forced to choose, I would probably go with the Canon. John, great presentation. All right, thanks everyone. I hope I answered everyone's question. If I didn't, you can send me an email. You can find more about me and my work at creativepathworkshops.com. And I also have the Creative Path Academy there, which is a membership program that is designed to help photographers unlock their creative potential through visual storytelling. And yes, we do. That includes making prints on Canson paper that let you express your vision. Thanks very much, everybody. I appreciate it. And see you on the next one. And there we go.